An old railroad tunnel shrouded in dense woodlands and tales of supernatural encounters, a historic state house where the spirits of former officials still linger, and an abandoned prison site whose halls are roamed by the tortured ghosts of inmates still serving time from beyond the grave, await on this list of some of the most haunted places in Ohio. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this exploration of some of the most haunted places in the Buckeye State of Ohio. Recognized as the birthplace of aviation, is a home grounds for the ever-popular game of cornhole, for its massive state fair, sweeping landscapes, sports history, and some of the best chili around. Ohio is also shrouded in a slew of ghostly stories, eerie legends, and tales of various cryptid encounters. What awaits on this list will shock you. Are you sure you're ready to get started? Our first haunt lands us in southeastern Ohio at the infamous Moonville Tunnel. The Moonville Tunnel, which is located in Vinton County, Ohio, is an old abandoned segment of railway track nestled deep within a lush chunk of local forest. Its bounds have grown wildly in infamy due to their association with local ghost stories and purported paranormal activity. Historically, the tunnel itself was constructed along with the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad, whose tracks cut through Vinton County right around 1856, and surrounding these tracks sprouted up a number of humble communities, which all centered around the small mining town of Moonville. Decades later, in 1883, this railway would change ownership to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Sadly, however, by the early 1900s and due to modern advances in mining techniques, Moonville and encroaching communities would be deemed obsolete, after which its residents would slowly move elsewhere in search of future opportunities. Over the following century, what was left of the township was claimed by time, the elements, and nature, and though it basically no longer exists and most of the tracks have since been removed, the Moonville Tunnel remains standing as a testament of what once was. In the present, the Moonville Tunnel has grown into a popular stop amongst historians, nature enthusiasts, and to local daredevils, teens in search of a scare, and paranormal investigators alike, and for good reason. Notably, alongside various reports of shadowy figures, strange patches of smoke or fog, phantom trains, and more, this prominent haunt is also surrounded by 4 significant legends. The first tells of a ghost called the Engineer, who's believed to be the spirit of former Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad worker Theodore Lawhead, who was killed through the 1880s when his train collided head-on with another. Chillingly, the specter of old Theo has been viewed walking the tunnel with a lantern in hand, seemingly searching for someone or something. A second tunnel legend tells of a ghost called the Brakeman, who it's believed belongs to the likes of a young, drunken man who was working on a train, and who'd consumed too much liquor when he passed out on the tracks, where he remained until he was run over and cut in half entirely. The Brakeman's silhouette has been sighted silently stumbling around through the darkness before vanishing without a trace. A third tunnel legend tells of a mysterious entity called the Lavender Lady, who has been known to appear along the trail briefly before fading away and leaving the scent of lavenders in her wake. And a fourth and final Moonville legend tells of a ghost called the Bully, who it's believed belongs to one Baldy Keaton, a former resident of the extinct town, who liked to start tavern brawls in his free time, and whom, after one such confrontation, was found dead on the tracks in what was deemed to be a murder. The Bully has been sighted right above the tunnel and has been known to throw pebbles or rocks at those who approach, and has also been used as a local warning by concerned parents, who have been known to tell their children not to stay out too late lest the Bully get them, and wrap them up in his immeasurably strong bear hug. Okay, and on to number 2, which takes us to the state's capital city, to the Ohio State House. The Ohio State House, which is located in none other than Columbus, Ohio, is a historic and prominent seat of government that's recognizable architecture and past have earned it a number of accolades and landmark designations, and its bounds have long been associated with a slew of terrifying ghost stories and tales of the otherworldly. Historically, predating the creation of the State House, Ohio's first state capital from 1803 and onward would land in Chillicothe until 1810, when political fighting amongst state leaders resulted in it being moved temporarily to Zanesville, after which, by February 14th of 1812, the General Assembly would create a new city on the high banks opposite of Franklinton, at the forks of the Scioto, most known as Wolf Ridge, for the purpose of holding a permanent capital site. After weeks of debate, this new city was established as, you guessed it, Columbus. By June of 1816, the General Assembly would meet out of a brick building on the corner of High and State Streets, and through the following decades, by 1838, the state's government would announce a competition for the designing of an official state house, resulting in the selection of construction staff and in this new site's cornerstone being laid on July 4th of 1839 under architect Henry Walter, though various setbacks, including a massive fire and a total rebuild, would result in the project not being officially completed until 1861. Over the years, the State House would act as a main location for multiple aspects of Ohio's government. By 1901, and facing crowding issues, a new State House was proposed. However, funding issues would result in the shuffling of various offices to accommodate demand instead, and subsequently, the Ohio Supreme Court would be moved to a separate building on the eastern end of Capitol Square, named the Judiciary Annex. Through the remainder of the 1900s, a series of upgrades and modernizations were welcomed. In 1965, an underground garage was added. In 1972, the expanse was added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 1994, a Capitol atrium was completed. In 1996, the Ohio Veterans Plaza was established. And from 1989 all the way up until that year, being 1996, a complete restoration of the property was hosted. The Ohio State House remains open into the present, housing a range of governmental activities, while offering various tours and educational materials to any with an interest. Though it may shock some, this esteemed government building has long been associated to tales of the supernatural and stories of the inexplicable, and staff, officials, and visitors alike have reported a range of supernatural activity, including objects sighted moving around on their own, the sounds of voices heard emanating from empty spaces or chambers, and the constant feeling of being watched or followed by someone or something unseen. A reoccurrent visitor in life, President Abraham Lincoln himself was especially fond of the Ohio State House, and a large marble bust within actually stands as a memorial to him. Interestingly enough, following his assassination and en route back to Illinois, his body would make one final stop at this prominent site, where thousands of people would visit to pay their last respects. Chillingly, the ghost of Lincoln has been sighted roaming around the property, especially near the rotunda, and has been known to wave or gesture at those passing by. One more interesting legend surrounds a space on the property known as the office window to nowhere. As it's told, through the 1920s, a series of modifications to the structure resulted in one particular office, whose window is still visible from the outside, being walled off entirely. Despite this fact, at night, many report sighting lights and figures moving around within. Lastly, through the Civil War, the State House was used as a garrison and makeshift medical site for Ohioan troops, and several have reported sighting ghostly soldiers roaming about, seemingly following patrols from life briefly before fading away. Number 3 has us checking in at one of Ohio's most popular historic lodgings, being the Buckland Inn. The Buckland Inn, which is located in Granville, Ohio, is a wildly famous historic lodging that stands as a testament to the luxury of a forgotten time, and its premises is shrouded in a number of local legends and spine-tingling ghost stories. Historically, the creation of the Buckland Inn predates that of Granville itself. In 1806, one Orrin Granger, who is not pictured, would purchase lands the inn now stands on. By 1812, he would construct a stagecoach tavern complete with a ballroom, a coach court, and a dining space. And over the years, the site would host a number of prominent figures, including that of General and later President William H. Harrison, who, in what was described in early history books as a cheerful display of bravado, would actually ride his horse right up the inn's courtyard steps and into the ballroom where a party was taking place. In 1821, Granger, who was only 32 at the time, would pass on, after which the property was passed from owner to owner until 1865 when it was acquired by Major Horton Buxton and was re-established as the Buckland Inn instead. Following the deaths of both Buxton and his wife, in 1934, one Ethel Bonnie Bunnell would purchase the site. Notably, through her ownership, Bunnell would actually reside within one of the establishment's rooms, during which time, it's told that she always wore blue and cared deeply for her beloved cat, whom she'd actually named Major Buxton. In 1960, Bunnell would pass on within room 9. Subsequently, the property was acquired by one Nell Scholar, who had helped Bonnie run operations, and sadly, over the years, the space would fall into disrepair, until 1972, when it was purchased by Orville and Audrey Orr, who would set to work on extensive full restorations. The Orrs would hold on to the prestigious property for 42 years before, in 2014, it was sold yet again to a preservationist group headed by one Robert Schilling, who retains ownership to this day. In the present, the Buxton remains open to the public and offers a host of unique rooms alongside a slew of hidden spaces and tunnels that are tied to its days as an underground railroad stop and later to a time through the early 1900s when it served liquor through Prohibition. Notably, the site is popular amongst tourists, history buffs, and paranormal researchers alike, and with good reason. Interestingly, however, hauntings on site are not a new occurrence, and legends surrounding them begin sprouting up pretty early into the inn's creation. Both various guests and later the Orrs themselves would report encountering the spirit of the establishment's first owner, being Orrin Granger, who has been sighted in various rooms tending tasks from life, or simply watching over the lodging with a look of proud accomplishment. Subsequently, the spirit of its next prominent owner, being Major Buxton, has also been sighted lurking about, namely in the kitchen or dining room, and the phantom smell of the cigars he so loved in life has been reported wafting through the air. Reported across the whole of the premises and confined to no area in particular are extreme cold patches, instances of objects moving around on their own, doors that open and close inexplicably, and the constant feeling that one is never truly alone. And several investigations of the area have yielded high EMF levels, crystal clear EVPs, and orbs captured in both photography and video. Lastly, possibly the most famous and commonly cited apparition on site is that of the inn's iconic Blue Lady, which is believed to be, you guessed it, the ghost of Bonnie Bunnell, who, if you'll remember, always wore blue. In life, Ethel absolutely loved the old lodging, and her spirit has been observed hurrying about, tending various tasks with a cheery demeanor, has also been known to enter guests' rooms, particularly rooms 7 and 9, in the middle of the night, and has even communicated with the living at great lengths. Oh, and apparently Bonnie's ghost isn't braving the afterlife alone, as the spectral form of her cherished feline companion, Major Buxton, has also been spied slinking about. And on to number 4, which lands us at the highly esteemed Cincinnati Music Hall. The Cincinnati Music Hall, which is located in none other than Cincinnati, Ohio, is a popular classic music performance hall serving as home to the Cincinnati Ballet, to the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, to the Cincinnati Opera, to the May Festival Chorus, to the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra, and more. That, over its years, has grown in infamy for its alleged connection to a number of chilling hauntings. Historically, on September 13th of 1818, the city of Cincinnati would purchase lands our hall now sits on for all of $3,200. In 1821, the Ohio State Legislature would pass an act to establish what was listed as a commercial hospital and lunatic asylum near, which would end up acting as a parent institution to the orphan asylum, the city infirmary, the Cincinnati Hospital, and the Longview Asylum. Following the cholera outbreak of 1832, lands on the same plot would hold a pauper cemetery. By 1857, the city would encroach on the property and would force consideration into a change in its usage, and by 1859, the expanse would be converted into the Elm Street Park, after which, in 1876, construction of a formal music hall was started, and in 1879, lands were turned over to the Music Hall Association. Later this same year, President Ulysses S. Grant would utilize the venue to speak to the public, during which time, documents report the whole of the site and its grounds were completely flooded with people. And over subsequent years, the hall would go on to host future presidents as well, including William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, Benjamin Harrison, and Dwight D. Eisenhower. As far as notable performances go, the Cincinnati Music Hall totes a long list of performers, some of which include Frank Sinatra in 1941, Johnny Cash in 1957, Ray Charles in 1961 and 62, Sonny and Cher in 1967, Ella Fitzgerald, The Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, and Miles Davis through the 70s, Bruce Springsteen in 1996, and the White Stripes in 2005. More recently, in 2016, the music hall was closed down for 14 months for a $143 million renovation that included structural and cosmetic modifications, and would reopen through October of 2017 to a weekend of performances and full access tours. The Cincinnati Music Hall remains open into the present, offering a range of shows and events while acting as a center for the arts within its sprawling city. Chillingly, ghost stories surrounding the music hall predate its very construction, with local tales telling of encounters with the spirits of those buried in the former cemetery, as well as with those lost in various earlier facilities that formerly stood around the site, ranging from children to the insane and elderly. In more recent times, both staff and guests to the venue have reported instances of objects moving around on their own, of doors that open and close inexplicably, of chairs that move by themselves, and of the sounds of phantom performances or crowds heard emanating from the site when it's completely empty or even locked up. One proponent of the hall's haunted history is that of longtime Pop's music director Eric Kunzel, who has spent many a late night practicing or organizing events within. When asked if the site was truly haunted, Kunzel has replied on numerous occasions that it most definitely is, that he's met a handful of its apparitions, that they're especially active from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the morning, and that contrary to some tales, they're actually quite friendly. One more spine-tingling story regarding the hall's ghosts comes from Cincinnati Opera CEO and director Patricia Beggs, who relayed an account of an employee who was visiting the property with his son. During their visit, the young boy asked, "Daddy, who's the man in the box?" before pointing to box 9. This employee explained to his son that there was no one in that particular box, to which the boy replied, "Yes, there is. He's waving to me right now." Needless to say, the man picked up his son and immediately vacated the building. Lastly, some of the most chilling stories regarding the hall have come from various night watchmen, spanning back to shortly after its creation, when it was actually reported in a local paper that one guard would commonly hear knocking on various doors, and would be overcome with goosebumps and an odd feeling that someone else was around, and spanning up to more recent accounts from one John Engst, who describes hearing phantom music and being overcome with a tingling sensation whenever he was near the elevator. Saving the best for last, our fifth and final haunt has us traipsing the ruined grounds of the old Ohio State Reformatory. The old Ohio State Reformatory, or Mansfield Pen, which is located in Mansfield, Ohio, is a historic prison turned educational venue that's bounds are tied to a chilling range of urban legends and tales of encounters with the unknown. Historically, grounds now holding the reformatory were, in 1862, originally utilized to host Camp Mordecai Bartley, which derived its name from a former Ohio governor and prominent figure, and that were used to train Union soldiers through the Civil War. Following the conflict, in 1867, the Mansfield region would be proposed as a site for a new intermediate penitentiary, after which the city would raise $10,000 for the purchase of 30 acres locally, while the state would acquire an additional 150 acres at a cost of $20,000. And in whole, the project was spec'd to run at around $1.3 million, which is quite a bit by today's standards. By 1886, construction was started and would run until 1910 under the guidance of architect Levi T. Schofield. In 1891, what was initially called the Intermediate Penitentiary was re-established as the Ohio State Reformatory, and on September 15th of 1896, the site would open its doors to its first 150 inmates. Through its initial years, prisoners would set to work on their own sewer system and surrounding 25-foot stone wall, and from 1935 to 1959, one Arthur Lewis Glatke would act as superintendent, and was actually highly respected both by staff and prisoners, the latter of whom he'd provided a number of luxury services, including piped-in radio to each cell. Incidentally, and rather tragically, Glatke would pass on within his own office on site from a heart attack, and would literally work until his last breath. Sadly, following Glatke's passing, conditions within the reformatory would steadily worsen due to inadequate staffing, underfunding, and overcrowding. During this period, a total of over 200 people, most of whom were prisoners, would pass on from various causes including illness, malnourishment, old age, and even riots or escape attempts, with the latter claiming the lives of 2 guards as well. Eventually, following a series of class action lawsuits through December of 1986, the site was forced to close its doors under federal court order, though due to construction delays and a replacement facility, it would remain in operation until December of 1990. Over subsequent years, a number of outbuildings and the prison's wall would face demolition, and in 1995, the Mansfield Reformatory Preservation Society was established and would transform the site into a museum. Oh, and as a fun bit of trivia, if this ominous structure looks familiar to any of you movie buffs, it was actually the same lockup utilized in the filming of the infinitely famous Frank Darabont movie, which was based off of a Stephen King novel called The Shawshank Redemption. The Ohio State Reformatory remains open into the present, offering a range of educational materials and tours of both the historic and haunted varieties. Not surprisingly, over its lengthy existence, OSR has toted a strong history of purported hauntings and chilling ghost stories, and staff, guests, and even inmates alike from its years in operation have reported a host of inexplicable activity, including instances of cell doors opening and closing on their own, extreme cold patches, and shadowy figures sighted slinking about. Through the 1930s, a violent riot would break out in the East Cell Block, which would result in 120 rioters being forced to share 12 solitary confinement cells for a week without food or water, a sentence that caused both insanity and death. From these solitary cells, some have reported the sounds of countless disembodied voices whimpering, laughing maniacally, singing, or crying, and many who enter them have described feeling exceedingly uncomfortable or claustrophobic, a sense that doesn't dissipate until they've left the area entirely. A number of deaths on site can be chalked up to various ailments such as tuberculosis or influenza, and disturbingly, one prisoner even killed himself by setting himself on fire. The full-bodied apparitions of those lost have been observed lurking through various parts of the building, and the manifestation of the Burning Man has been known to sprint past doorways quickly, terrifying all present. Lastly, the phantom of Arthur Lewis Glatke himself has been sighted from time to time, a contemplative look on his face as he seemingly eternally watches over the premises that he dedicated his whole life to. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted places in Ohio. If you enjoyed listening to my histories and hauntings, subscribe to my channel, like this upload, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll catch you all next time.